3 years ago, the Florida legislature passed Senate Bill 256. It was a bill designed to attack public sector unions by making it harder for them to collect dues, while simultaneously forcing them to show that at least 60% of their members were in fact paying dues. Any union that failed every year to meet that threshold faced a decertification vote. The measure was pushed by the Freedom Foundation, a right-wing think tank funded by billionaires. The Freedom Foundation has never been shy about what their real intention is, which is to eliminate public sector unions. On their website, under a banner that reads, "Why We Fight," they argue that, quote, "government unions are a root cause of every growing national dysfunction in America." So again, it's no secret where they're coming from. Using Senate Bill 256, the Freedom Foundation went after the state's largest teachers union, the United Teachers of Dade, and financed a massive campaign to decertify the union. I investigated the Freedom Foundation and interviewed the group's Southern director, Rusty Brown, who took credit for helping write Senate Bill 256. How much money has the Freedom Foundation spent so far on their campaign here in Miami-Dade County?
I don't have that number in front of me. I mean, it's obviously not small. I mean, you can do the math on what mailings cost. They're not cheap, but like I said, that's not something I'll shy away from. You know, this is going to be a very expensive campaign. Reaching out to 30,000 people is not cheap any way that you cut it.
How much are you dedicating to this campaign against UTD?
Whatever it takes.
Is more than $1 million? Are we likely to see a campaign that's going to run into the millions of dollars down here?
It's hard to say, but I mean, I hope not, but, yeah, I mean, reaching out to 30,000 people is not a small feat. The Freedom Foundation likely did spend several $million trying to sway teachers to vote against UTD and eliminate the union. And yet, when the vote was counted in October of 2024, UTD won with 83% of the vote. And in the 3 years since Senate Bill 256 passed, there have been 209 decertification votes against teachers' unions across every part of the state. And in all 209 cases, the teachers voted overwhelmingly to keep their union. So clearly, this strategy by the governor and the Freedom Foundation has not worked. So now there is a new bill, Senate Bill 1296. And this bill rewrites the rules on those union elections. Under this bill, the union doesn't just have to win with a majority of the people who decide to vote. They would now be required to have a majority of every employee in the school district. We could not find a rule like this anywhere else in the country. Imagine if this applied to elected officials. You wouldn't have to just get a majority of the people who vote. You would have to get a majority of every registered person who is eligible to vote. Take Ron DeSantis, for instance. In 2022, he won with 60% of the people who voted. But he only received 4.6 million of the 14.5 million registered voters, which means he only received 32% of all registered voters. So by this new standard, is Ron DeSantis an illegitimate governor? The sponsor of the bill is Jonathan Martin, and during a committee last month, Senator Tina Polsky asked Martin this question before being cut off by the committee chair.
Do you know what percentage of the electorate voted for you in the last election? Not percentage that you won by, percentage of the people who are registered to vote who actually voted.
You don't have to answer that question. That doesn't have anything to do with the bill.
It seemed like a good question to me, so I decided to check. And guess what? Senator Martin received less than 50% of the total number of registered voters in his district in the last election. Now, I wanted to talk to Senator Martin, but he did not respond to my request for an interview. And there is one other thing about this bill. It does not apply to unions for first responders. So the only unions exempted from these new election rules just also happen to be the ones who supported Ron DeSantis in the last election and have a long history of supporting Republican candidates, including those in the legislature today. And the ones being targeted tend to support Democrats. Last month, dozens of public sector workers, teachers, nurses, bus drivers, utility workers testified about how this bill would hurt them.
I'm asking you, please do not vote for this bill. It hurts those who work hard.
This bill hurts me. If you support education and workers, do not make it harder for my family to live.
Not all people affected by this are teachers. They keep saying teachers, but I'm a utility worker for my entire career. And I may not be considered a first responder, but when the water goes out, I'm the one you call to get it back on. And this affects my whole family.
We already make very little. By doing this, we don't have rights. We don't have somebody to support us.
It's hard to get groceries, right? It's tough these days. So, thank you.
While most people spoke against the bill, there were those who were in favor, including a familiar face, Rusty Brown from the Freedom Foundation. I recently caught up with Rusty to talk about the Freedom Foundation and the governor's latest attempt to target unions. Were you involved in the Freedom Foundation in drafting this bill?
We consulted with them on it. It was more of something that we were advocating for.
This is a very, very broad brush that you're now painting here, where you are requiring, it used to be, a majority of those that vote, and union members often have different reasons for why they turn out to vote or decide not to vote, just like Americans decide whether or not to vote or not to vote. And why now create the standard that it has to be, you have to get 50% of the registered union members to be able to stay in existence? Essentially, you're creating a standard that very few, if any, will be able to meet.
That's not true. First of all, if they have over 60% membership, they're not even subject to the elections process, which a lot of unions do.
But you made it harder to get to that 60% threshold of union dues-paying members in the last bill by making it harder for them to contribute to their dues. You took away the ability to do automatic deduction, and so now each individual has to figure out through Venmo or writing a check each month. So you made it harder at the same time you raised that standard from 50 to 60%. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it seems like a very deliberate part on you and certain legislators to make unions virtually impossible to exist.
I don't think that's a fair characterization. And I think when you compare it to other elections, you have to look at what a union does. They are the sole bargaining agent for a group of employees. That group of employees could be tens, hundreds, thousands, or 5. It doesn't matter. And when they're the sole voice, it should be a high threshold. It should be the highest possible threshold that it could be to make sure that they really truly represent the voice of the people that they represent. When you try to compare that to a legislator, you're talking about one voice in a legislative body of, in the case of Congress, you got many, many hundreds. And in the case of Florida, you got many dozens. And no legislator has anywhere near the power over somebody's day-to-day life that a union does that's bargaining on your behalf.
Well, let's just take the governor, for instance. Using your standard that to be legitimate, you should be able to get 50% of those who are registered with the union. If you look at that, in 2022, there were 14.5 million registered voters. Ron DeSantis received 4.6 million votes. That means he only got 31% of registered voters. By your logic, Ron DeSantis wouldn't be a legitimate leader of the state of Florida.
Well, if he were subject to the same rules as what would be on unions, but I think the comparison is not fair. I think that a union that has a direct influence over somebody's livelihood, over the working conditions that you go to every day. Legislators don't have that.
You don't think the governor has a direct impact on people's livelihoods and the conditions that they go to work every day? He appoints the PERC board, gets them ratified. I mean, clearly the governor has extensive authority and power, and yet you don't apply the same standard to him. Donald Trump, for that matter, received, 6 million votes in 2024 out of 14 million registered voters. By your standard, he wasn't really legitimately winning the state of Florida.
I disagree with the comparison of political candidates, regardless of the office, as a union that is the sole only bargaining representative. I mean, when you're in a union when you're represented by a union, you don't even have the right to go speak for yourself. If you think you're doing a better job, you cannot go down to your boss and say, hey, I deserve a raise. Like, oh, sorry, we have a salary schedule. The union bargains for that. They have a much higher.
I'm trying to understand, what is the ultimate goal here? Because I heard Senator Martin talk about this as well during the committee hearing recently. So do you think that the best scenario would be for each individual teacher, for instance, or each individual nurse at a hospital, because this affects not just teachers, we talk a lot about teachers, but it affects nurses and school bus drivers and sanitation workers, any city or county employee who's represented by a union. Do you want each of them to individually go to the city or county manager or the superintendent of the school district and negotiate individual salaries and benefits?
So that's a complicated answer to that. So number one, all that this bill would do is make unions accountable to their members. Like, do what your members ask. Do the best that you can for them, and you should have no problem showing the support. Now, you step outside of that. You say it like it's an unrealistic possibility. There's several states around the country, including my home state of Texas, that don't have collective bargaining rights for public employees, and yet we have teachers, and our teachers on average.
Is that the goal, though? Is that really the goal here in Florida, is to get to a point where public employees don't really have collective bargaining rights?
No, I've never said that.
But
I've absolutely never said
you were
that.
talking about how you have that in Texas, you have that in other states. It seems that that's the goal here, even though Florida's Constitution allows for the ability for collective bargaining.
It allows you to have the right for collective bargaining, but at the same time, the way that exclusive representation is added into that equation, it also forces people to be subject to collective bargaining. It's a two-way street.
Well, except in Florida, which is a right to work state, nobody is required to pay dues to the union. It's a right to work state, which means you can get all the benefits of having the union represent you, negotiate your salary, negotiate your benefits. And you seem to suggest that the benefits and salaries would be better without the union. I'm not sure there's any evidence of that. But nobody has to pay into the union that doesn't want to, correct?
Absolutely correct. But membership and representation are not the same thing. You can be a teacher or a sanitation worker, nurse, whatever the case may be, and you can not want to be part of the union, but yet the union still bargains for you, even if you don't like it. And so why shouldn't the majority of employees in a bargaining unit have to show support and prove support for what the union is doing? I mean, I would argue that that's the most important function of a union.
Okay. Now, I just want to jump in here to make a point that Brown overlooks. He asked the question, what if a teacher or a nurse or sanitation worker doesn't like the contract and benefits the union negotiates on their behalf? He makes it seem the employee is stuck. But what he fails to remember is that any contract the union negotiates still must be voted on and ratified by all the workers, including those who do not pay union dues. And so it is just not accurate to say non-union members don't have an opportunity to vote on what the union does. All right, let's go back to my conversation with Rusty Brown from the Freedom Foundation, and I wanted to understand why police and fire unions were exempted. If this is such a good idea, why doesn't it apply to first responders? Why doesn't it apply to the unions that represent police officers and firefighters and correction officers?
So as far as the carve out for public safety, look, that's a decision that was made through the political process. That's not something that we advocate for or against. I have no stance on that whatsoever.
So do you think it's political?
I can tell you that it matches the statute in a variety of different areas. I mean, there's all kinds of different carve outs for public safety, throughout Florida law. And this is just another example of it.
You think it could have anything to do with the fact that those unions, police, fire, corrections, all endorsed and supported the governor, Ron DeSantis?
Ron DeSantis is not the only vote in the legislature. And, this was how they decided that they wanted to introduce the bill.
It's his administration that's pushing this bill.
Yes, but it has to make it through the House, the Senate, 3 committee stops on each side. And, it's been supportive so far every time it's been heard. So just to say that it's Ron DeSantis that decided, I think would be a misrepresentation of the bill and the support that is there for these measures.
Tell me honestly, Rusty, you think Floridians would be better off if there were no unions represented public sector workers. Am I right?
I think the unions that will survive this process will be the ones that best represent the people that they represent.
Who do you think those are? Can you cite me one of those unions?
No, that's
Do you
not for
think
me to
any-
decide.
any
I'm not
other
a
than-
Florida public employee.
Other than the first responders, do you think any other union survives this bill?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a number of unions that have maintained over 60%, and as long as they continue to maintain over 60%, they won't be subject to these new election requirements.
I'll wrap up with this. You believe that nurses, sanitation workers, bus drivers, teachers would do better without a union than with one?
I would say that slightly differently. I would say if they have a union that doesn't have their support, then they feel they would do better without one.
On Monday afternoon, this bill goes before the Senate Fiscal Policy Committee. The committee is chaired by Senator Joe Gruters, who is also the chairman of the Republican National Committee. There are a number of South Florida senators on that committee, including Rosalyn Osgood, Alexis Calatayud, Chevron Jones, and Ana Maria Rodriguez. We'll keep an eye on the bill and let you know how they voted.